Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Matt Williams. I'm a tutor in politics and what is known as the Access Fellow here at Jesus College at the University of Oxford. Now in today's video I'm going to talk through what it takes to write a great essay at a university. The reason being is that I've marked about 4,500 essays in 13 years of teaching here at Oxford and also teaching for 5 years at the University of Reading. And I wanted to give you some of the insights that I've gleaned from that as to how you can write great essays, because it's sometimes a bit of a mystery for students, and I don't really like things being mysterious for students because it just makes them anxious. And so I'm trying to eliminate some of that anxiety with this video. This is quite a broad video, so we're going to be explaining from the worst types of essays to the best types of essays, but in future videos we'll go into a bit more detail on some of the specifics so that it will hopefully be more helpful. I'll also be revealing to you something of a dark secret about academia later, so you better stick around for that. But it's also worth noting that this is particularly applicable to the UK, although many of the points I'll be making do have global application. But just be careful, make sure you check with tutors or teachers in your institutions in case anything's different. Right, starting off with not so great. So we're going to go from the worst to the best. So in the UK, a bad essay would be a fail, and that would score a mark of less than 40. Okay, so what does it take to have a properly bad essay? Well, something that's technically not even an essay, frankly, and that is something that doesn't try. Now, the word essay, the etymology of the word essay is a French verb meaning to try. And so an essay that doesn't even try is not technically even an essay, and that is a complete failure. So what does that concretely mean? How does that look in a specific essay? Well, it could be if the student has been asked to write 2,000 words, which is the standard length of an Oxford University essay, but they actually turn in 500 words. Or it could be that they plagiarize, that they cut and paste large chunks from another author's works without attributing it to that author. I've received essays, for example, that were just cut and paste from Wikipedia completely, and that is a big problem. And we'll go into things like citations in another video, but that's a very important thing. If you use someone else's ideas, you've got to make sure you attribute them to those people. Okay, and we have quite sophisticated technology to check if someone is basically cheating and copying from someone else's work. Another thing a bit more modern is using artificial intelligence, and I'm afraid we can also tell that pretty often as well. So an essay where you don't even try on your own is obviously not even an essay technically, and that's the worst type of essays, and thankfully they're quite rare in British universities. Okay, so moving up from 40 or below, which is a fail in the UK, to between 40 and 50, which is what's called a third, which is not a great essay, but you know, it's something we can at least work with. So what sort of things do we tend to get there? Well, fundamentally, it would be a lack of focus. So this is where the student has perhaps missed some of the core elements of the instruction. So they might, for example, not actually answer the question directly. Now, I like to describe essay writing as a bit like a court case, and you have to answer the question, the whole question, and nothing but the question. And students that fail to do so are likely to get very poor marks. So it could be that they are just not directly answering the question they've been asked. They're going off-piste a little bit. They're looking at other things that are not directly relevant. So let me give you an example of a history essay from the University of Oxford, which is, did the Tudor dynasty establish itself by 1509? Did the Tudor dynasty establish itself by 1509? Now, if a student just decided to talk vaguely about the Tudors or the history of that period, but without actually focusing on that particular question, they would likely get a score of between 40 and 50. They're basically not focusing sufficiently, and focus is so important in essay writing. Another common problem that you find in essays between 40 and 50 is that they lack command of material, and that basically means that the students haven't read enough usually. Or it could be that they've not gone to lectures, and I'm afraid not going to lectures is a complete false economy. When you go to lectures, the tutors will tell you exactly how to focus your analysis for the essays and for the exams, and you save yourself a lot of time on your own if you go to those lectures, so it's well worth it. Okay, so those are not great essays, but at least they give us something to work on. Now we're getting into much more decent essays. So an essay from 50 to 60 would be a 2-2, and that's getting all right. I mean, not many people get 2-2 grades at finals at the end of their degrees, but it's all right. So what are some of the attributes of essays in that mark range? Well, they tend to have much better command of material, so the students tend to have read some key text, they understand the period, they get what they're talking about, they're demonstrating their knowledge quite well. But one of the most fundamental problems with essays in this mark range is that they are difficult to read. They may be poorly structured, and we're going to go into essay structuring in a standalone video because it's so complicated and so important. But the analogy I tend to make is that a good essay is a recipe and a not so good essay is a shopping list. So if the student says, well, there's this point and then there's that point and then there's other point, that's a bit like someone saying, if you want to make a cake, you need flour and butter and sugar, but without telling us how they mix together. Okay, so that's one of the core problems with essays that are not so well structured, is that they don't tell us how the bits fit together. We don't just want a list of disconnected points, we want a whole essay, a whole argument, and that's the key difference. And typically essays in the range from 50 to 60 lack that clear structure, that beginning, the middle and end, which is a bit of a problem there. Okay, so that's one of the primary problems. Another thing is that the writing can be inaccessible, and we like to be able to follow the thread of your argument, but if you're writing in a bit of a stream of consciousness, so that as soon as stuff comes into your brain, you write it down, it can be quite difficult to follow. And that's why it's so important to plan essays. Fail to plan and you should plan to fail is the old British military adage, and it works just as well for essay writing. Okay, so those are essays that are pretty good but could be better. Now we're getting into good essays. So essays over 60 would score a mark of 2-1, a grade of a 2-1. So what do we look for in essays like that? Well, they would have good command of material, so the students do know what they're talking about. They've read key texts on the reading list, they've gone to the relevant lectures, and they understand the topic pretty well. But we also start to see good evidence of analysis. Now, analysis is one of those words that's thrown around but not very well understood. The analogy I like for analysis is that it's like an angry kitten with a ball of yarn. It tears it to pieces. You know, some other metaphors that are used are things like dissection or deconstruction. Analysis is where you take a big problem and you break it into bits in order to reconstruct a response. So an example essay question from my field, politics, is why might autocrats or elites grant power to a wider electorate? Why might autocrats or elites grant power to a wider electorate? Now, a good essay would deconstruct, would break apart the bits of that question. What does it mean to grant power? What is power? Who are elites? What's an autocrat? And they would start to sort of work out all of the different intricacies, and they would have great focus on all of the bits of the question. Remember, answer the question, the whole question, and nothing but the question. And so that's when you're starting to get into good territory if someone's analytical, focused, and detail-oriented. Okay? Now, the best essays, those are essays of 70 and above, start to show significant independent judgment and evaluation. So this is where the students are basically explaining what they would like to add to the conversation. They're not just describing what other authors have said in a passive way, they're actively getting involved in the analysis and the contributions. And so fundamentally, I encourage my students to speak for themselves, to say, I would argue this, to use that first person pronoun, I, me, my. I know that at some schools and universities, it's been discouraged to say I, me, my about what you're contending. But it's so useful to the authors to know what value you are adding to the debate that you have not just taken from someone else's work. And that's the truest essence of an essay, to try, right? You have to try for yourself. You can't just take other people's work and compile it. You have to add something new. You have to have some added value. And that's what we reward most highly. Okay, now that can be quite difficult, and it involves reading a lot and understanding what the literature says in order to understand how you can contribute. But think about where you can contribute as well. If you imagine an essay is a bit like a layer cake, most people contribute just at the theory level. So the theory is the stories we're telling. So in regards to that question about autocrats granting power to the wider electorate, the story would be, well, why would they do that? But you don't just have to look at that level of the cake. You can look at lots of other levels as well. So there's things like concepts. So that's what is an autocrat and what is the wider electorate. Those are other things where you can add some value. There's what's called meta theory, which sounds really complicated, but it's not too difficult to grasp. That's how extensive is your theory. Does your theory apply at all times and in all places, or is it more limited? That's meta theory. It's the theory about your theory, and you can contribute there as well. You can also contribute with regards to methodology. How do people test ideas? How do they test their theories? What sort of approaches have they used, and what sort of approaches might you use? What sort of sources of data would you use? You can also even contribute with regards to evidence. You might come up with a new case study or a new illustration, or you might conjoin other people's uses of evidence to come up with something new. So it's trying to add that freshness, that added value at different layers of the proverbial cake that get the best marks. And the best essay I ever read was written by a visiting student from Brazil, and he was completely unfamiliar with British essay writing. And so I just told him all of these elements, and within a week he wrote something that could be published. It was so beautiful. And that links to the dark secret that I was going to raise with regards to academia. The dark secret is that, to my mind, universities are a very strange branch of the entertainment industry. That the highest praise that I've had for a piece of my own writing was not "that's true," but "that was really interesting." And so something to bear in mind is how you write elegantly, but still clearly. How you make people want to continue reading because they find it fun and enjoyable. And we're going to go into that in lots more detail in the next video. But it is important to write in a way that people want to keep reading. And as I say, pretty complex, pretty difficult, but we'll discuss it further next time. If you've got any questions or suggestions for future videos, do let us know in the comments below. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, bye.